Good evening and welcome to 16 by 9, The Bigger Picture. They joined the military eager to fight for their country, but some American soldiers are fighting another battle, questioning whether their sacrifice is really worth it. Some call them war resistors, others call them traitors. Well, tonight our Carolyn Jarvis talks to these men and women.
In a house of God, known more for taking in society's cast-offs than parishioners, there is a quiet prayer.
O Lord, be not far from me.
A plea from a soldier seeking sanctuary from two battles. One, a war he doesn't believe in. The other, a fight being waged behind the walls of Parliament. The debate centers on this: whether American soldiers who refuse to go to Iraq and flee to Canada instead should be sent back to the U.S. and face the consequences. Rodney Watson joined the Army after being laid off. He went to Iraq once and vowed never to return.
And I've seen soldiers who would kick and throw and spit on the Quran in front of these people, feed them pork and tell them it was beef, smack them and beat them up just because they had a bad day or just because they hate them because they're in Iraq.
What he saw and experienced left him disgusted. Stationed in a tower behind the trigger of a .50 caliber machine gun wasn't anything close to what he was promised.
They said you were only going to work in a kitchen.
I signed up to be a cook. They told me if I was going to be deployed to Iraq, my job would be to supervise a dining facility.
When Rodney arrived home 1 year later, he was filled with anger.
I'm feeling I don't want to ever go back.
Relief?
Relief and the feeling that I'm never going back. Never.
His 3-year military contract was nearing its end when 2 weeks after he returned home, Rodney was ordered to go back. And so his options were clear: return to Iraq or go AWOL.
I was fighting with myself because I said, okay, if I do this, if I do desert, I'm leaving my family behind. I'm leaving my friends behind. I might never see them again. I might even be called a traitor. I might even be looked upon as a coward.
On the day he was supposed to report to base, Rodney boarded a Greyhound from Kansas City to Vancouver without telling a soul. Weeks grew into months, and over the course of 3 years in Canada, he picked up odd jobs, applied for refugee status, fell in love, had a son. But his aspirations of becoming a Canadian citizen were dashed when in August 2009, his claim and its appeal were turned down. Rodney had to be out of the country in a month.
They ultimately denied me.
And that is where the church came in.
Hi, how are you?
Reverend Rick Matthews offered Rodney religious protection from political persecution.
Thank you. There's a wide body of the community that believe this should be heard and dealt with differently, not just for him, but for others in his circumstance.
But how long are you willing to let him live here for?
Until such time as we find a way that's resolved out of that. We would continue to provide refuge for him as long as it makes sense to do so.
Years?
Absolutely. In the past it's been that. Often refugees do stay for years.
So this is where you live?
Yeah, this is where I'm staying at the moment, yes.
And so Rodney's makeshift home is a modest apartment on the top floor of the church, where he waits for the answer he wants.
My main goal is to be with my son, to be here for my family. I've created a new family here, and that would just break my heart.
To make sure that people of good conscience who left the war not approved by the United Nations are able to be eligible to become Canadian citizens.
His best chance of staying likely lies with Liberal MP Gerard Kennedy. Kennedy has put forth a private member's bill that would make it easier for war resistors to stay in Canada.
Mr. Watson's discomfort, I think, represents the need for the rest of us to get on with it, have this debate, change this law if necessary, and make this government observe the will of the majority of Canadians.
But getting the bill passed will be tough. In 2008 and 2009, MPs voted on 2 motions to let war resistors apply for permanent residency and to cease removal orders currently in place. Both times those motions passed with a majority, affirming the will of Parliament is to let war resistors stay. Despite that, the Conservative government continues to issue removal orders and has turned down every claim so far from Iraq war resistors. Michelle Robidoux from the War Resistors Support Campaign.
It's highly unfair that if our Parliament has voted to let war resistors stay, to not deport them, and not send them back to jail, which is what he faces if he is returned to the US, then the government should not impose its minority view on the rest of Canadians.
We asked to speak with Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, but our repeated requests for an interview were turned down. His staff saying he's addressed the matter in the past. Here's what he said.
What frustrates me a little bit is when we have bogus refugee claimants, they clog up the system. I would say people whose claims are being constantly rejected are not making legitimate refugee claims.
When the minister in whose hands that decision lies has said that those who are seeking escape from the war in Iraq are bogus refugee claimants, then you've by definition prejudged the hearing itself.
If Rodney wanted to know what the consequences are of fleeing the U.S. military, he need only look here, to San Francisco, and the story of a young man named Robin Long, who was handed one of the harshest penalties yet.
They just were like, we want this headline, we want this to read across every newspaper in the United States and every newspaper in Canada, so these people were coming up here seeking asylum.
The punishment for desertion is wide-ranging, anywhere from a slap on the wrist to the death penalty, although that has never been used. Robin Long was sentenced to 15 months after becoming the first Iraq war resistor deported from Canada. His story is painfully similar to Rodney's.
He's just like you. He has a child there.
Yeah.
He's got a girlfriend there.
They don't give a shit. The government in Canada, immigration does not give it, sorry for saying that word, but they don't care. They don't care that you're a person, that you have a family. They don't care about that little soul.
Robin never served on the front lines. He realized while still in training that the mission he was about to be sent on was not the one he had been sold.
The reasons that were given to go to Iraq is there were weapons of mass destruction there. Saddam Hussein was this horrible leader. He oppressed his people, and there were direct ties to Al-Qaeda. Well, no weapons of mass destruction have been found to date. There have been no connections with Al-Qaeda. And so it leaves just the regime change, but that is not a legitimate reason to go to war.
And so on the day of his deployment, Robin fled north, where he met a girl and started a family, and just like Rodney, applied for refugee status. He too was denied. Then, on July 4th, 2008, his story took a turn when 2 police officers showed up at his door in Nelson, BC.
They said, can you come with us? You have a nationwide immigration warrant. I felt like I was wronged. For one thing, I have a Canadian son, lives in Canada. Because I was not given a chance to leave Canada on my own, I'm not allowed back there for 10 years because I was deported.
In a matter of days, Robin was shipped back to the United States and court-martialed for desertion. Outside his trial, his supporters called him a hero, but the jury saw otherwise and sentenced him to 15 months.
They did want the harshest, sentence possible. They did want me to be an example.
It's been 6 months since Robin was released, and he's only seen his son once since leaving Canada. He's trying to get back, even though he knows that's unlikely.
I've lost pretty much everyone that I knew before going AWOL, like my friends and most of the people in my family. Now, some people have started to talk to me again, but I've lost a lot.
Despite the immense toll, he has no regrets and counsels Rodney not to give up.
How long do you think you'll live here?
As long as it takes for me to get everything sorted out.
And so in a Vancouver parish, Rodney waits.
I'm relying mainly on my faith in God right now. I'm walking by faith right now.
Praying for Parliament to pass a law, to reconsider his plea, and to let him stay.